welcome to the Saturation Podcast, where we have discussions with church leaders about the life of faith and the mission of the church. My name is Levi Pancake. I serve as a local church pastor in Syracuse, New York. Also have the privilege and opportunity to work a lot with SCP Global and the Global Fellowship and a number of partners around the world. My guest today on this podcast is a dear friend of mine, colleague, Jim Murphy. Jim Murphy is a pastor in Mount Ayr, Iowa, of a church there, and also the creator, inventor, proponent of the My Circle training, which, you told me that, what's the tagline for that?
So it's mobilizing Christ people for mission in everyday life that leads to evangelism.
There you go. And you created this training and train church leaders, leadership teams, members of churches, globally, not just in the U.S. Today, in this episode, I want to talk a little bit more about this training. It's a helpful resource for churches all over the place. It's a resource that we have capitalized on in our local church extensively, to the point where we're regularly asking the question, have all of our members gone through this training at some point in the last few years? And if not, we want to take them through it. I've been through this training, probably more times than I can count. I
maybe
think
more times than I have.
Maybe 6, 7, 8 times.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of our church members have as well. And so I want to talk about this training. First of all, why did you create it? What was your burden? What was going on that you felt like you needed to document and then begin coming up with something? And then we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of the training.
Yeah. So it really started, I did not intend to write a training that would go to other churches or that I'd go be a guy that works with other churches. I never have considered myself an expert or sought to be one. It really came when Jordan Stinziano and I moved to Syracuse, New York, to not just plant a church, but to be a part of God's redemptive mission in a geography and in the world. Mm-hmm. And being driven by these convictions that we've been talking about in this podcast from the beginning, that whatever God's going to do in the world, he's primarily going to do it through all of his people. Whatever he's going to do in the world, he's primarily going to do through leaders who empower them as their first priority of leadership. And number 3, whatever God's going to do in the world, he's going to do through a decentralized structure. And when we went up to do that 15, 16 years ago, this idea of every man, every woman, and every child. And in that, God's going to use his people. And here I am, a leader. And we drew a circle or kind of said, we're going to start in this one neighborhood or in this one part of the city.
Yeah.
And really,
in that circle, as you're saying, we're going to take spiritual responsibility to ensure that they have access to the gospel there.
Yes, because we didn't want every man, woman, and child to just be a slogan that sounds really good, but it actually was a guiding principle for us to go, okay, that's going to affect the decisions we make and how we do things. And so that led to doing things that aren't unique to us, but it started for us to go, okay, how are we going to start in this one neighborhood? And how do we begin to reach 18,000 people? And there I was in the middle of it, and we started prayer walking. And I was prayer walking a street, had a couple people with us, and I just began to be overwhelmed by the mission on one street. As I'm like, there's a house, there's there's another side of the street, there's a house. This is one street, and there's multiple streets. And I'm like,
you imagine if it was an apartment complex?
Oh my goodness, my head would have exploded. And I'm like, how are we gonna, and I literally started like, how are we gonna get the gospel behind that door, and that door, and that door, and that door? And then a couple of weeks later, I'm sitting in a Dunkin' Donuts, and I'm watching people from all different walks of life walk in. And I began to get overwhelmed again with the mission, like just in this one Dunkin' Donuts and just in this one street. And I kind of got frustrated with every man, woman, and child, to be honest. It's a lot easier to fill a room than it is to reach every man, woman, and child. But then all of a sudden, these things started to click for me. Wait a minute. Whatever God's going to do, he's going to primarily do it through all of his people. We're going to take the long approach to this. decadal work over time to see a geography saturated with the gospel, but we're going to strive to be intentional with it. And then I thought, okay, my role as someone who's evangelistically wired is not just to go do it for everybody or to take the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% of the people that would do it, but to go, how do I sit in the midst of this body as a local church pastor and equip all of them to begin to be on mission together? And that's how the training began to be developed. And it was simply from a burden of what God's doing in the world, how that was going to be practically lived out in a place. And then I'm sitting in the midst of a people that I'm supposed to shepherd wisely. And as an evangelist, go, I got to equip people. And I want to equip them biblically. I want to equip them practically. And I want to equip them in a way that is not personality dependent. It wasn't just for extroverts, but introvert, like all of Christ's people could do it. And then I started to think, how was I brought to faith? How does God, what are some things my wife and I and my family do? And slowly but surely, this training developed over time. And then we saw effectiveness, people beginning to see, I can actually do this. And then other churches were like, we need help.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of grew from there.
Yeah, and this training, I think, is unique compared to other trainings in terms of the emphasis. And you already said it in the tagline, so maybe you can say the tagline again.
Yeah.
And what the scope of this training is trying to accomplish. And then we'll get into the outcomes of what you're trying to accomplish with this training.
Yeah. In short, it's mission in everyday life that leads to evangelism.
Okay.
And I've intentionally separated out mission and evangelism.
Okay.
Because I think that sometimes this word mission can be used all over the place, and we don't really. Sometimes
it can be a buzzword.
It can be a buzzword,
but
it's a helpful word.
Yeah.
We believe in the mission, right? So what I wanted to do is to see that evangelism is the goal, because we actually want to share the gospel with lost people.
Right.
But I think history can show us, and I think even in our culture could show us, like that act of evangelism should be within the context of something a little more robust, patient, intentional. And that, so kind of one of the things that I'll talk about a lot is, can we place gospel proclamation in the midst of meaningful conversation that is inside of a relationship that can bear the weight of truth?
It's good.
And so the mission part of that is this idea of what we talked about a couple episodes ago. Like, I want to live intentionally. I want how I live to be intentional. I want the people around me that don't know Jesus to see and experience from me a qualitative distinctiveness that what we would say is the kingdom of God. I want my decisions to be seen up close, our marriages, the way we raise kids, what I prioritize in my life, how I treat them, all of that. And so mission for me, for an individual person, is living intentionally inside of God's grand mission of redeeming a people to himself. That then leads to the point where I'm able to tell people about this amazing power of God unto salvation for all who believe.
That's really good. And why is a training then necessary? Why don't we just do that instinctually? Why don't I just read my Bible more and then I'm going to go do it? Why is a specific training then?
Yeah.
I agree that it is necessary, but expound on that.
I think on one level, we see the graciousness of Jesus to his church, where, is it 1st or 2nd Peter that we have everything we need for life and godliness through his word.
Yep, 2 Peter 1.
Yeah, 2 Peter 1, sorry. And then we have the Spirit inside of us and all that stuff. And so, yes, I agree. But yet the graciousness of Jesus to go, but I'm going to give you leaders.
Yeah.
Apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, because he knows, like, part of how he's going to mobilize people is through the Spirit, through the word, and through teachers and leaders that help mobilize them.
Yeah.
So on one level, just biblically, this is a thing. But then on another level, I think evangelism in this life of mission, even though people are increasingly believing it's optional, at the same time, of all the churches that I've been to, of all the Christians that I've spoken to, people that carry a gospel conviction do know they need to be a part of sharing this.
Mm-hmm.
And
no matter how much we ignore it,
no matter how much we ignore it,
we know it.
We know it. And I think that there is this element around evangelism that just seems terrifying. And it seems like in this world that can be so confusing, there's all these different narratives, and we're scared to make things awkward. And in order to be an evangelist, do I have to be, like a Billy Graham, or do I have to be this extreme extrovert that's so good with my words?
Like a Jim Murphy?
Well, I don't know about. Well, thank you. You're very kind. Hopefully not. But I think the average person sits in the midst of that and goes, "Well, I can't be that. I don't want to ask gotcha questions. I don't want to just condemn people all the time.
Yeah.
And so how do I do this?" And that's where my attempt with my circle is to go, here's a way you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't mean that you don't have to make intentional decisions. I'm not going to say that I've laid out this perfect path that requires no reorientation of your life.
Yeah.
I've been searching to write that book a long time. How to evangelize without changing anything about your life. I can't find, I can't. But it is accessible, and you can do this.
Yeah.
And I've had more and more people tell me, I can, for the first time, see that I can actually participate in what God's doing.
Yeah. And I love how you've connected it to the broader mission. You've mentioned before about apps and operating systems. Just use that metaphor for a moment, and then explain the outcomes of the My Circle training.
Yeah. So I wish I was smart enough to come up with this, but a colleague of mine who I work with in My Circle said, this is really an operating system that helps frame for people, introverts, extroverts, good with your words, not good, who all young, old, new believers, more seasoned believers, we can all live in. And the beauty of it is we can all be living into these same 5 outcomes, but they're going to look different from one person to another.
Yep.
They're going to begin to take on, like if my wife was here, as you know, my wife, she is not this extroverted, upfront person, but she's one of the most faithful missional evangelists, and she's more of an introvert. And the way she lives it out, like it brings tears to my eyes. It's so sweet and beautiful. It's very different than how I do it, but we do the same thing. That's where I think the beauty of the operating system is. It's like, this is the framework on how to live missionally. You get to apply this. And then we have various apps that can help us proclaim, have tools to think about how we're going to build relationships with people and display the kingdom. That's where these apps come in that go, okay, in light of this larger idea of how to think about how to live, here's an app that can help you practically apply that. Mm-hmm. Either in proclamation or things to help you engage in this level or that level. And I think a lot of evangelism training has simply been at the app level. Here's the bridge illustration, or here's the story. And people are like, okay, I see that, but I don't know how to get from where I am now to doing that with someone.
Yep.
And My Circle kind of is meant to build that gap.
That's really good. So tell us about the outcomes of the My Circle training, what you're trying to accomplish with it.
Absolutely. So the 5 outcomes, 1 is more of a heart issue, and 4 are real practical.
Okay.
So the first one is that we would embrace God's mission.
That's important.
This I would say is the first among equals. Because if we don't embrace God's mission as our own personally, we're never going to live the other 4.
Yeah, because that addresses the motive.
Yes.
If it's guilt, if you're feeling pressure from others,
100%.
If you know you ought to be doing it,
100%.
That's really important.
And one of the things we'll talk about that, and we'll lay out a whole biblical case as to what that looks like, answering the why, answering the who, helping people wrestle with this with some questions in their own life. What is my belief about the gospel if I don't share, all that stuff. But when it comes to embracing God's mission, and you said it great, it's not about guilt, and it's not about excitement.
Yeah.
What I would rather...
Nor is it about only compassion.
Nor is it only about compassion.
Those aren't bad things, but they can't be primary.
But the thing in my mind is, how do we do this from conviction?
That's good.
That will lead me to suffer, to be willing to be awkward, be willing to even go, I'll open my home. When I feel dejected, I'll still move forward. All that. So conviction is the prime. So number one, that we would embrace God's mission. And the language that we use is, okay, if we embrace God's mission, that will look like this. Number one, you identify my circle, your circle of influence, your mission field, by specifically writing down the names of people. And I think that is a really important step, because if we're not careful, the lost or the mission field can just be this faceless sea of humanity that means everything and nothing.
Yeah.
It can also just be people that live far from me. But when you have people that actually sit in the midst of their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, their family, when they begin to think about their own children and grandchildren,
right,
when they begin to think about their spouse, they have to actually begin to write the names of people that don't know Jesus. And then you begin to go, that's your mission field. That's your personal mission field that Jesus has sent you back to reach. Now, we also have them identify believers in those same relational spheres to remind them you're not alone.
That's good.
And can you partner with some of these other believers? But at the end of the day, you are in the midst of these lost people specifically, and we should know them. And then that leads to the second outcome, or the third outcome. That
your numbering just got messed up.
I know, I'm sorry.
We're on now number 3.
We're on number 3.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's why this relationship works, Levi. But that thirdly, that we would pray daily for at least one person that we've identified. And that we would pray some specific prayers, number one, for us as an ambassador to them. And that we would pray that God would move in them. In effect, the simple way to say it, God save them. You use me and save them.
Yep.
Number 4, that I would engage weekly at least one person I'm praying for because I've identified them. And when I say weekly, like that's intentionally opening up space in my life to draw people close, to build a relationship with my presence, me being present in their life, that I can begin to build a platform of grace, that I can begin to get to know them at a deeper level. So I want to engage weekly, and I break engage up into kind of 2 ideas. Number 1, with my life and with my words. And how do I begin to build not just a relationship with my presence, but then begin to, with my words, begin to move our conversation towards the gospel, where it's not gotcha type questions, but it's an ever deepening conversation that we are both sharing life, thoughts, hopes, all that stuff together. That then leads to the 5th outcome, which is that we share. And the tag I put out is, could we share monthly with someone that we're engaging because we're praying for them, because we've identified them, because I've embraced God's mission.
Yeah.
And sharing monthly, I think about this idea of that may not necessarily mean I've walked through the bridge illustration with them or the Romans Road or the Story app, although ideally that'd be great. Yeah. But am I generally pointing them to Christ and the hope of salvation in him through either my own story, which we talked about, Grace Story, or just the gospel? And what various tools can I use to help me do that? And so each aspect of the training helps lay tracks for people to understand what that looks like in their life. So the 5 outcomes are: embrace God's mission, identify my circle, pray daily, engage weekly, and share monthly.
It's really good. It's been really helpful, I think, for me, my family, our church family, and I know a number of partners around the world as well, as you've walked them through it. How do people access the training? Is it online? Do they need to know your cell phone number to get you to come to their church? How could people engage this resource?
Yeah, there's really 2 main ways. So one way is you can have a live training, and I can come, raising up a couple other people that can come and do a training at your church. And there's some way to think about that beforehand and some things that we coach people on afterwards. but that's one way. The second way is you can engage it online.
Okay.
So the whole training is online. It's with what's called the Lead Learn Project, or Lead CMA, and the website is learn.leadcma.org.
I'm going to say it one more time just for clarity.
Say it one more time, yes.
So they can go to this website to access videos, documents, resources,
all that
workbooks.
Stuff. Yes.
Learn.leadcma.org.
Yes.
That is learn.leadcma.org.
Yes.
If they want to access some online resources to help themselves or their church grow in these outcomes that you just described.
And you can connect with me through that as well. So the way that it's laid out on that website is we built it kind of like a masterclass. So there are these 5 sections around the 5 outcomes, and there are multiple videos underneath. And the videos range anywhere from 4 to 7 minutes long. And we built it in bite-sized chunks that you can begin to watch. I think there's a couple videos that are 10 minutes long, but by and large, they're meant to be, kind of step this out for people and not try to overwhelm them.
And something that people can do individually. People can do it in a classroom format.
Groups,
people can do it in small groups.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate how you've made it accessible to the broader body as well. And I really do appreciate, and it does come from a larger conviction that we share. You said it, the instrumentality of all of Christ's people. Mm-hmm. Whatever God's going to do in the world, whatever God's going to do in a specific geography or place, he is going to do through the priesthood of all believers, through all of Christ's people.
Yes.
And I'm so blessed by the fact that you haven't given up on all of Christ's people to be that instrument. We're just focused on a small percentage. We're paid professionals. We're the ones who are extraordinarily gifted or outgoing or extroverted in this. But as leaders, we cannot give up the leadership responsibility, nor can we give up our, if I can use a term crassly, like our greatest asset is all of Christ's people towards seeing the gospel be made accessible in a particular place. And so even if the person who's weak in this area can just grow a step, a baby step growth in this, and then the cumulative effect of it over time, not just by going through this training, but going through the training, but then also trying to integrate some of those principles in all the various vehicles of discipleship you have, championed by church leadership, championed by leaders across the church, and begin to try to infuse these outcomes in all your different environments. People will, to varying degrees. You said patience with people, but people will, to varying degrees, grow in this. There's ebbs and flows, there's highs and lows. But if we can keep it on the forefront, the Missio Dei, the mission of God, on the forefront of people's minds and hearts, and then give them tools and resources with accountability and reinforcement, I love that you haven't given up on the instrumentality of all of Christ's people, because it's necessary and
it's biblical.
It's biblical.
It's biblical. And I can't help but think, number one, the way that I was brought to Christ. Like I shared a little, I was at a Promise Keepers event when I heard the gospel. And I'm like, yes. However, that was built on 7 or 8 key people in my life, starting when I was in 6th grade, that loved me and lived this in front of me and was patient with, in a way, like the term to kind of be, they my-circled me for years. That when I was at that gathering,
they prayed for you. They engaged you.
Me. They asked me questions.
They shared the gospel with
me. They did all of that.
They pointed you back to Jesus. They invited you to church. All of those things.
And it was in cars. It was on walks. It was over dinner tables. It was
high moments and low moments.
High moments and low moments. And I just can't help but get this image out of my head that what would it look like in every congregation if the primary evangelistic spaces were dinner tables, back porches, going on walks, friendships, over coffee, that the gospel of grace is going out. And then the Sunday morning can be a significant tool within that context.
Yeah.
And this
not
is
necessarily
what
tailoring the whole gathering towards those who don't know Christ, but it's for the church, but it can be
yes, but the story that every believer has been given and restored to in Jesus, and the Spirit that lives inside of them has a far more profound effect in the evangelistic work than solely inviting people to come to church. Like that's that's not your only job, which is why we're pushing so strongly against don't let that be your sole evangelistic training. Mobilizes people.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about a book that I read a number of years ago, Michael Green, Evangelism in the Early Church. And one of the things that I was just captured by was him talking about, yes, God used evangelists, and yes, God used apologists, and yes, God did, but the primary means was the slave girl combing the hair of her master, telling her about Jesus. It was the Roman centurion who had just come to Christ, standing with fellow soldiers. It was the wife who comes to Christ first and lovingly serves her pagan husband, even unto suffering. And it was all through this ordinariness of life and being willing to live for the name of Jesus with more intentionality every day, and then having opportunity to share that with other people, that the extraordinary means of grace are shared, proclaimed, and displayed. And why would we want to keep that a secret or hidden, or merely just say, sit in the pew and invite other people to sit in the pew to hear the professional talk? I've got to believe Jesus died for more than that. I've got to believe that our witness and ambassadorship is more than that.
Yeah.
And can we just do the hard work, the patient work, the intentional work of going, oh, Christ's people, see the part that you have to play in the historic mission of God. And when one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Christ is Lord to the glory of the Father, and all of his churches gathered around that throne in the new heavens and the new earth, won't that be worth it when we see this is what we've given our lives to?
Amen. Amen. Brother, I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your work that you're doing just in and among Christ's people. I want to say the website one more time, learn.leadcma.org. If people want to get a hold of you or access to some of this training. And of course, for the broader stuff, they can go to scpglobal.org. But thank you for your work, brother. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Saturation Podcast, where we have discussions with church leaders about the life of faith and mission of the church. This podcast is produced by Saturation Church Planning. Saturation Church Planning exists to glorify God through partnering with church leaders in nations, regions, cities throughout the world towards the full evangelization of those places through the mobilization of the church. For more information, please visit scpglobal.org.